Hi, and welcome to our second unit for EDTE 2000. Remember, this course has three main units. The first one helps us understand who our students are. The second one is focused on how they learn and how they think, which is obviously incredibly important to us as educators. We will be doing this by looking at different learning theories, and we're going to be starting with cognitive learning theories and Jean Piaget. Now, I know some people think that learning theories can be dull, but I will try to make them come alive with examples and teaching tips. So, let's get started. Who is Jean Piaget? So, Jean Piaget is a Swiss psychologist. He's actually one of the first people to have that name, psychologist. He's actually considered to be the founder of child development. Pardon me, one of my cats is being a little ornery. Down, baby. So, he started off studying albino sparrows. And then he found that children were so much more interesting to study than animals after he got married and had 3 little girls. His studies of children became so expansive that he earned this prestigious title, Founder of Child Development. Let's hear a little bit about what he thinks about learning in his own words.
En effet, le vrai problème de l'éducation, c'est quel est le but de l'éducation? Est-ce qu'il nous faut former des enfants et des individus qui soient simplement capables d'apprendre ce qui est déjà connu, de répéter ce qui est déjà acquis par les générations antérieures, ou bien est-ce qu'il s'agit de former des esprits novateurs, des esprits créateurs, qui soient capables d'inventer dès le niveau de l'école et ensuite pendant toute leur vie dans le domaine.
Now, I'm sure most of us had to follow that by reading the subtitles, but basically what he's saying is, what are we doing in education? Are we just teaching students things that we want them to repeat back to us, or do we want them to create their own knowledge? Now, that argument still stands today, and that was probably 50 years ago. So, Constructivism is one of his first big principles we're going to be looking at. This is the idea that children learn best, and perhaps the main way that they learn is by interacting with things in their environment, which is why children like to beat on pots and pans and touch and look and, check out everything in their environment. Constructivism is one of the key theories of learning, so we're going to delve into it a little bit here. Let me start with this. I found this online, and obviously it's quite relevant. Children learn by doing, and doing is noisy, untidy, messy, and unpredictable. Constructivism sometimes has a barrier, and that barrier is parents and teachers who want to keep things organized, on track, and neat and clean. So, for instance, these are pictures of my daughter when she was about 2 to 3. And in both instances, I walked into a mess, and my first inclination was to go, ugh, what's that mess for? But I tried to pause and ask her what she was doing. In this example here, she said that she couldn't see all of the colors when they were stuck inside the box, and she had to lay them all out to see what kind of colors she had. Okay, well, that makes sense. And then down here, what are you doing down here? And she says, oh, well, I wanted to better see how the cats eat. So she poured the food out on the floor to watch how they eat. Okay, well, that makes sense. She is interacting with things in her environment, trying to learn, trying to make her own understanding. That is the essence of Constructivism. And it's based on the idea that children are innately curious. Innately means it's something that we're born with, it's something that all of us have. That we are curious and we are active learners. That it wouldn't be the same thing if I told her how the cats eat, or if I told her about the colors that she had, but her discovering it on her own, in her own curious way, made it more meaningful. So the PBS show Curious George, and obviously it was first based upon a series of books, is based on this premise. Curious George gets in trouble every single episode, but it's always because he's trying to learn something or figure something out or fix something. Can you think of a time, so here's a question for you, can you think of a time that curiosity motivated you to learn something on your own? It may be difficult to retrieve an example from your childhood, but think about now as an adult. Think about a time that curiosity has driven you down one of those internet rabbit holes trying to find the answer to something. That's that idea. Okay, so I also thought this was a relevant quote, that wonder is the desire for knowledge. Wonder is very similar to this idea of curiosity. So this fits with the idea of how it drives knowledge. And this was by St. Thomas Aquinas, who's actually written quite some good things about education. All right, so also is the idea that children construct their own understandings. We construct knowledge. We don't just absorb it verbatim. So even though you're all hearing this same lecture, you're not all going to have the same understanding of it. You're not just a tape recorder that plays back in your head what I said. You construct meaning based upon your own understandings, your own beliefs and expectations, and personal stories. I love this. So the art of teaching is the art of assisting discovery. So through your prompting questions, your discussions, your assignments, your examples, you find a way to help students find meaning. All right, here's a great video that talks about how you can view your students as scientists through this discovery process of learning.
Kids are born scientists. They're always turning over rocks and plucking petals off of flowers. They're always doing things that by and large are destructive. And no, that's what exploration kind of is. If you take stuff apart, whether or not you know how to put it back together. This is what kids do. An adult scientist is a kid who never grew up. That's what an adult scientist does. So what happens at home is the kid reaches in the refrigerator, pulls out an egg, and starts juggling it. What's the first thing you do as a parent? Stop playing with the egg. It could break. Put it back. Excuse me, this is an experiment in the material strength of... Let the kid find out that when it drops, it breaks. This is a physics experiment. Rapidly turned into a biology experiment, okay? The yolk oozes out. You say, hey, that becomes a chickie one day, okay? Wait, how does this gooey oat become a chicken? Well, that's biology. Check that out. And what did the egg cost you? 20 cents? President of Harvard once said, if you think education is expensive, you should try the cost of ignorance. So we don't have enough parents who understand or know how to value the inquisitive nature of their own kids because they want to keep order in their household. Kids go into the kitchen and pull out all the pots and pans and start banging on them. What's the first thing you say as a parent? Stop making all that noise. Stop the racket. You're getting the pots and pans dirty. You just squashed an entire experiment in acoustics.
So you can see where he's going with that. And if you want to listen to the whole thing, it's easy to find online, but it was a great talk. So this idea that children need opportunities to explore, opportunities to discover things for themselves, to explore principles and ideas. And whether you realize it or they realize it or not, it is scientific concepts that they are often exploring. Here's a short video on constructivism. This is obviously my daughter. I was in the middle of cooking, and I looked over, and here she is on the kitchen floor. And just like Neil deGrasse Tyson said, I wanted to say, "What are you doing?" But I stopped, and I got out the camera, and I watched.
Good job.
And not only is she stacking things, she's shaking things, she's checking things out. She ended up stacking up about 4 cans, and that was the first time she'd done something like that. So those little moments are cumulative, and they add up. So here's a question for you. How can teachers use this? How can you have a constructivist teaching strategy? Well, you might have already guessed from what I said, but I wanted to make sure we had it in the notes and that we thought about it. Think about science fairs. That is kind of the essence of a constructivist teaching strategy. You say, go home, come up with a hypothesis, test it, see what you find out, come back and tell us about it. So teachers and parents both need to give children opportunities to explore, discover, and learn on their own. And that includes making mistakes, and that includes making messes. So I love this cartoon here. So you see this kid, it says, as Jason was learning to walk, the Grunsleys made sure he was outfitted with roll bars. I see so many parents that are afraid that their kid's going to fall down or afraid that their kid is going to drop and break that egg. But just like we heard in the video, there are lessons to be learned there. Okay, so moving on. That is one of Piaget's main ideas or basic principles. We're going to cover 3 of them today. So your second one is assimilation and accommodation. So that is a bit of a mouthful. Let me see if I can break it down. Before we understand assimilation and accommodation, we need to understand this idea of schemas. So as children are constructing their knowledge of the world, their brain creates schemas. So this is kind of a picture of it here. So here's your brain creating schemas based upon one's experiences, and some of which they get rejected and some of which become mental schemas. Our schemas are a way of categorizing and organizing information in our head. So if you think about your files on your laptop and how your information is filed and organized, it's kind of like that in our brain. That our brain has mental schemas, organized networks of information. So for Homer Simpson, we can see his biggest one is sleep, followed by donuts and Duff beer, okay, and so on. So and all of us have a different set of schemas in our head that, again, make sense of our experiences. As we get older, our schemas grow in quantity. So quantity meaning we get more and more and more and more of them. And they grow in complexity or quality. So as we get older, our schemas, we get more and more and more of them, and they get more and more complex. So how does that happen? How do these schemas grow? These schemas grow through assimilation and accommodation. But first, a question. Can you think of some specific mental schemas that you have? Can you think of, are there certain categories that you have in your head of information? What about a schema about how to study? Schemas about sports that you play or extracurriculars or hobbies? Schemas about the music that you like? We have hundreds of them. So again, the way they grow is through assimilation and accommodation. So let's break that down. We'll start with assimilation. And again, these all go under the heading of how do children use and adapt their schemas? How do they grow? First, they do it by assimilation. Assimilation is the most simplistic way. So this is interpreting something new using existing schemes. Okay, so interpreting something new with the information you already have in your head. Let's look at this silly cartoon here. So we have a little squirrel, and the kids see the squirrel, and here's what they're saying. Look at him! It's a kitty! Yay, kitty, so cute and fluffy. And the squirrel saying, I'm ready for them to get out of this assimilation stage and learn that I'm a squirrel. So these kids are assimilating because perhaps they've never seen a squirrel before. So the first time they see a squirrel, they call it a kitty. That is assimilation. It is their attempt to understand something new, this little guy here, using what they already know. And at this point in their lives, we're assuming they understand kitties, and that's perhaps the closest thing to it. So here's a really cute short video that's related to that.
Look at all those chickens.
Okay, so obviously they're not chickens, but maybe she's never seen geese before, but she knows chickens. So when she sees them, look at all those chickens. So when you think of assimilation, think of, look at all those chickens. So we have assimilation, using what we already know to understand something new. So that's just another way of saying it. Here's a silly example from Family Guy where Peter encounters a new word that he doesn't know, so he assimilates by using things that he already does know.
Meg, will you take one of these and pass it down, please?
What's this?
I'm starting a new advocacy group, the Quahog Animal Equal Rights League. Our first meeting is tomorrow night, and I'd really appreciate it if you guys would come and show your support.
Well, of course we will, Brian. We'd be happy to come.
Terrific. See, I thought I'd start locally and then maybe try to merge with one of the larger groups.
Oh, that's a great idea, Brian. Maybe you could join PETA.
Join me for what?
No, PETA, the organization.
What organization?
PETA.
What?
PETA is an acronym, PETA.
No, I'm not. I'm Catholic. Are we really doing this?
No, PETA, I'm just saying maybe if this meeting goes well, Brian could be part of a PETA rally.
Somebody's having a rally for me now?
No, for PETA.
That's me. I'm Peter.
I'm not talking about you, PETA.
Okay, so you can see where that's going. So because he has never heard of PETA, all he can do is assimilate, and it sounds similar to a name that he knows, which is his own. All right, so assimilation doesn't always work, because if you don't have information of that new thing, like PETA or geese, you don't know what to call it. You don't know how to understand it. And in those instances, we use accommodation. So accommodation is creating a new scheme or adjusting an old one to interpret something new. So the little girl who saw the geese, she needs somebody to show her the difference between, here's a picture of a chicken and here's a picture of a goose, and let's talk about their differences. For her to accommodate and create a new scheme when it comes to birds. So here's an example. So we have a little girl who saw this four-legged animal for the first time. At home, she has a four-legged pet that she calls dog, so she calls the cow dog. That's assimilation. But accommodation is when mom tells her it's a cow and then hopefully explains and provides some detail. And then she understands, oh, there's cows and there's dogs. Accommodation happens when the existing schema, so our existing knowledge, is not sufficient. It doesn't work for this new example and needs to be changed to deal with this new situation, this new object. So I think hopefully those examples made sense. If not, I do have a couple more. For instance, we have the little girl with the doggy. She sees a cat and she calls it doggy. This part is assimilation. This part is accommodation, when Dad sits down with her and talks about the difference between dogs and cats. With accommodation, I'd like you to know that it is more substantial, it's more meaningful, it's a deeper form of learning because it allows us to take in new information, and hence this is the way we learn something new. With assimilation, we're just trying to connect the dots. With accommodation, we're adding more dots, shall we say. And I love this example. So a child sees a porpoise swimming in a large tank of water. Maybe they're at SeaWorld. They assimilate and say, oh, look at the fish. It's a fish because, well, it's underwater. It has fins. It must be a fish. Assimilation. But then they see the porpoise breathing. They come up out of the water to breathe. And they pet one and it doesn't have scales and it's not cold. They accommodate and realize, oh, there are other things that live in the water other than fish. There are mammals that live in the water, and so forth. All right, so we've covered 2 of Piaget's 3 main ideas or basic principles. The last one is called equilibration. Equilibration is something that's going to happen in your classroom every single day. It's happening to you right now while you're sitting at home. It is simply the cycle of learning, where you go from having a schema. Well, basically you start with assimilation, you update your schema, you use accommodation. It's this whole cycle of learning, and I want to break it down to try to make more sense of it than this simplistic photo does. So, what are the steps of equilibration? It typically starts with what we call disequilibrium. Disequilibrium can also be seen as mental discomfort. That's why I use this little guy down here. Mental discomfort, why? Mental discomfort because you've encountered something new that you can't explain with your existing schemas. Okay, so with what I know in my head right now, I cannot explain this new thing that I'm seeing. And because I can't explain it, I feel mental discomfort or disequilibrium. We don't like it when things don't make sense to us. It makes you want to understand what you're observing. It kind of drives your curiosity or your wonder, because you're going, okay, this doesn't gel with what I know. What the heck is that? Can you recall a time that you've ever felt confused this way? Whether it was in school, whether it was in everyday life, or simply going to a zoo and seeing an animal you've never seen before. Anyone? So as you can probably guess, I have a couple of examples for you. So I saw this picture on the internet of an animal I'd never seen before. So I had to show it to my husband. I said, imagine you are going through the jungle and you're on an exploration and you turn the corner and you see this. And I could see the look on his face like, is that real? Is that someone dressed up? What the heck is that? And that's how I felt too. Mental disequilibrium. What the heck is that? And then I wanted to know more about it. Okay, so it's this bird called a spoonbill in Africa, and they're huge and tall, and they have this crazy face, and so that is that mental discomfort, okay? So here's a regular school example. I remember in a math class, the first time a teacher put a problem like this on the board. She wrote it on the board and then spent, 4 or 5 minutes getting ready for class while we all sat there staring at this problem. And I specifically remember thinking, okay, there's a letter up there. What am I supposed to do with a letter? I mean, I know what to do with numbers, but letters, how can you add a letter? That was disequilibrium, okay? Oh, pardon me, because we all felt confused and we were waiting to hear what she had to say. So, to better understand, you re-examine and revise your schemes. So you use assimilation and accommodation. So I sat there thinking, okay, based on what I know about numbers, is there a way I can solve that problem? Or based on what I know about birds, is there a way to figure out what that bird is? I re-examine and perhaps revise my schemes through, again, those two processes. Oops. So the teacher continues and she shows us how to solve the problem and that X is basically like a placeholder for a number. And then suddenly it makes sense, and then I can accommodate my understanding, all right? Now I have reached equilibrium. Equilibrium is called mental comfort because now I have the schemes to understand what I see. I'm no longer confused. No longer do I not understand. Events can now be explained. And this whole process, this whole cycle is called equilibration. Now I know it is a tongue twister. Equilibration, which is the process of disequilibrium turning into equilibrium through revising your schemes through assimilation and accommodation. Say that 5 times fast. But it still is a good way of describing this simple process of learning. So because I am a sci-fi geek at heart, I'm going to use one of my favorite sci-fi movies to explain equilibration. Perhaps some of you will connect to this. So this is from the original Matrix movie with Keanu Reeves. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend. Whether the directors realize it or not, the entire movie can be a way of symbolizing equilibration. So let's start.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about? The Matrix. Do you want to know what it is?
All right, so that is the moment of disequilibrium. You can see on Keanu Reeves' face, he's going, what? I don't even understand what you're saying. Okay, that's disequilibrium. Then your next step is you have to either assimilate or accommodate, right? You have to either stick with what you already know and use what you already know to make sense of the world, or learn something new and create a new understanding and accommodate. Oops. And you can see that in the next scene.
Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe.
Assimilation.
Take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Accommodation. Then he chooses to accommodate, and he realizes that the world is not at all what he thought it was, and creates vast new understandings of the world. And by the end of the movie, he reaches equilibrium because he sees this fake world for what it is, which is a computer, which is the Matrix. Okay, I don't want to spoil it for you. All right. So I realize that was a bit out there, but sometimes it's fun to see how things can connect to unusual examples. So here's a practice more related to school. Mrs. Taylor presents Shakespeare for the first time by reading a passage from Macbeth. Her students are confused by the language. Everyone is at first with Shakespeare. After reading it aloud, receiving some explanations, they begin to understand it. Okay, so this state of confusion is called, if you thought disequilibrium, you were right. The new state of understanding is called, if you thought equilibrium, you're right. The entire process is called equilibration. Very good.